And a bass that's set up in shade is a way more catchable bass than one that is just out in open water. And then a fish that is in shallower water generally is just more catchable than a fish that is in 5, 7, 8 foot deep. Because a fish that's this deep, it doesn't matter if he's suspended. He's not far from the top or the bottom. So his strike zone is kind of the whole water column. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Technique of the Month. We are here for September, and September is definitely an interesting month for bass fishing, no question about it. It's a month that I've had some success in. It's a month where I always get a little bit older every year when it comes around. My birthday is in September this year, and it's in September every year actually, but this year I'll be turning 40, big 4-0 this September. So yeah, definitely getting on up there, I guess, in my years and going around the, what is it, trips around the sun? Is that what it, that's trips around the sun. Yeah, got to make the most of every trip around the sun that God gives you, and 40 of them for me this year. So yep, but no, September, obviously September is a month that personally I love to fish shallow. I love to fish out of that boat over there. That's the Tracker Grizzly. Love to spend some time in the jet boat going up rivers, all that kind of stuff. That's the time of the year, in my opinion, when that is at its best and the lake is at its worst, typically. So, yeah, I do. I love fishing out of a jet boat, and we've talked about that a lot of times here on Technique of the Month and different videos. And then I also look at, like, the team series that Andy and I fished last year. Team series we fished up in Wisconsin. We were able to win that. Didn't fish any river systems on that deal, but still caught our fish really shallow. And some of the fish that we caught in that were on real shallow docks. Shallow docks, that's kind of the topic for today. And kind of the way that I will fish those shallow docks this time of the year. And it varies some. Let me say that it varies some based on, you know, the location you're in. You know, if you're up north, generally those shallow docks, a lot of those lakes are clear, and you're going to fish a little bit different than you are if you're in, you know, if you're in the central part of the U.S. or south part of the U.S. or, you know, even down towards Texas or Florida or something like that. It's going to vary a little bit, but I have seen it, you know, across most of the country, that those shallow docks, especially in the month of September, just in the fall in general, but those shallow docks can be really, really productive. Honestly, way more so than deeper docks. And so just to kind of break it down a little bit, those shallow docks, how shallow am I talking about? I'm talking about as shallow as you can possibly get your boat close enough to fish. From that shallow, you know, to where the end of the dock is no more than 3 or 4 feet. In my mind, you get, if a dock has more than 4 foot of water on the end of it, it's not really a shallow dock anymore at that point, in my mind. You're kind of talking more of a mid-depth type dock. But what I'm talking about is truly those docks that are anywhere from, you know, this much water to 3 or 4 feet is kind of where this pattern typically works and shows up, in my opinion, this time of the year. A lot of times those shallow docks are going to be on the upper end of a system. You know, I think of, just looking at the lakes around here, thinking of Fort Loudon, for example. You know, the docks that are on the main lake down on the lower end, they're pretty much all deeper, other than occasional, a few on a flat here or there, something they're pretty shallow. But especially you get further up the lake, you're going to have more and more of those docks in really, really shallow water. And what's going on there, I think, is the fact that, number one, you've got shade, okay? And a bass that's set up in shade is a way more catchable bass than one that is just out in open water. It doesn't matter what depth he's in, but if that bass is set up in shade and he's set up to ambush, that makes him more catchable. And then a fish that is in shallower water generally is just more catchable than a fish that is in 5, 7, 8 foot deep. Because a fish that's this deep, it doesn't matter if he's suspended. He's not far from the top or the bottom. So his strike zone is kind of the whole water column at that point in time. So that is a big, big key part of it, I think. And that goes for all shallow water. I think that's why we catch so many fish shallow, is because their strike zone, a bait that's on the bottom or a bait that's on the surface, is still in their strike zone. Where if a fish is, in 10 foot of water, a bait that's on the surface may not be anywhere in their realm. Or vice versa. It could be in 10 foot of water and be 2 foot deep, and a bait that goes to the bottom isn't in that fish's, you know, it's not in its realm. It's never even going to see it. So, again, I think that's why those shallow docks can be really, really key because you've got shade working for you and you've got a condensed strike zone working for you as well. So those are the type of places where I'm going to be looking for. And for me, and man, most of the fall, honestly, is always about a reaction bite. Once the water starts getting cooler, I'll fish some slower bait and some of the fish that I'll catch this time of year, possibly I'll catch, pitching around and that kind of thing. But so much of my fishing in the fall is about moving baits, and this type of pattern on these shallow docks is no different. And for me, I'm going to do a couple different things. One, obviously, this is not a bait that I can skip under a boat dock, but a small crankbait, that's the OG Tiny, a bait that I can fish throwing down the side of docks, throwing across the end of a shallow dock, fishing any wood I may come to in between or that's washed up against the dock, something like that. But a shallow, flat-sided crankbait is something that I catch a lot of fish on off of boat docks this time of the year. And I think that that's partially because not a lot of people throw them around docks. I think people are fairly scared of throwing a crankbait around boat docks. And I get it. You don't want to take a $10 bait and go trying to sling it underneath there and hit a pole and break it. I get it. But man, you can absolutely catch a lot of fish on a crankbait because of that reaction bite that you can get out of it that you just don't get on much else. Even a bladed jig, which is something that obviously you can skip under there a lot further. Sometimes you're more efficient with it and it works really well, but you just don't get quite the same reaction bite out of a bladed jig that you do a crankbait, something that you can actually fish kind of fast and make it still track true and deflect off the cover, that type of stuff. That's something that I do with that little OG Tiny around boat docks, especially this time of the year, early in the fall. And those little shallow docks, you're not making a long cast. I'll typically fish this on 14-pound fluorocarbon in this particular situation. And I'm not making a long cast, 30 or 40 feet. So I'm able to really control the depth of this thing. It'll run 4 foot on a really long cast on 12-pound line. But oftentimes I'm not getting it more than 2 feet deep. And I want it to get to the bottom. Sometimes, but I don't care that it is always on the bottom, especially if I'm able to hit dock posts with it and that kind of stuff. So I'm able to get that deflection by bouncing it off of those. Don't necessarily have to have the bait hit it in the bottom throughout the retrieve. And then the other bait, the other style of fishing that I like to do around these docks does involve skipping it. Does involve, getting as far back under those docks as possible. And again, these shallow docks, especially the even shallowest ones that we're talking about, a bait that goes in there, a jig or something that goes in there and is on the bottom, those fish can certainly go down to it and eat it. But if that bait is coming across the surface, you've skipped it in there across the surface and then it's sliding back out across the surface, that is just a very, very good way to trigger those fish into biting. And in my opinion, there's not much better way to do that than with a toad style bait. Something that's just a toad that skips really well. Put it on a hook by itself. I don't put it on a buzz bait most of the time in this situation. And it is literally just the toad. I'm going to put that on like a 4/0 VMC Redline heavy duty wide gap hook. And just that wide gap hook is all you need. You don't have to have the ones with the screw lock and all the rest of that stuff. Just rig it up on a 4/0 heavy duty wide gap and you'll be all set. And I'll have a natural color, like a watermelon candy or something. Then I'll also have a shad type color. And sometimes there's one is absolutely better than the other. Generally speaking, more off-color water, I'm going to go with the shad color one. And clear water, I'm going to go with the more natural color one. So, but one of those two, toads, skipping that dude in there, buzzing it back across the surface, you're going to get a lot of reaction bites with that. And both of these baits, both these ways of fishing, there's stuff that I'm going to fish under that dock with, and it's stuff I'm just going to keep in my hand while I'm going down the bank to get to the next dock with as well. So it's, they're very, very efficient baits and something that I don't have to be jumping back and forth with something else in between. Any target that I come up to in between docks, these baits are likely to catch a fish on as well. But yes, I have definitely seen shallow boat docks really, really produce this time of the year, and that's something that I think a lot of people overlook. They want to fish docks that are too deep more than anything. I think that's the single biggest mistake that I've seen people make. And that team series event that Andy and I won last year in Wisconsin, on the championship day on Green Lake, there were a lot of docks on that lake. But the end of the lake that we fished had a big bay with the shallowest docks in it. And those were the best docks for us. They extended way, way, way out off the bank, and they got out to the deepest water in that area, where it was about 2 or 2.5 feet deep. And I think that was a big part of it. And that zone produced a lot of fish. But what was really interesting, the single biggest fish we caught, single biggest one, is only 4-pounder we caught. Andy caught some 3-pounders, but the 4-pounder that we caught, it was on a pretty shallow. It wasn't the shallowest docks we fished, okay, but it was a pretty shallow dock. The end of it come out to like 3 foot, but I caught it off of the shallowest pole on that dock right next to the bank. So, I mean, that fish had the option on that particular dock. It could have been out there in the shade under 3 foot of water. Instead, it was about that deep up under the very shallowest part of it where there was some good shade. So that's another one final key, one final thought to leave you with. When you're fishing those shallow docks, to fish the whole thing. Don't just fish the outside and skip all the walkway poles and everything else. You actually need to go through there. You don't have to spend a lot of time, but man, you need to go through there and fish as shallow as you can possibly get your boat, the very shallowest cast you can make, because sometimes that's where the biggest ones are going to be. So get out there, go chase you some shallow docks around this September. I think you'll be glad you did.